Hey, you've seen this, right?
Pika,
Uh, Wait, why is the camera all set up?
pika,
I told you I would do it when I do it. You're not forcing my hand here.
pika, pika.
Oh, you think you can force it? Yeah, like what are you gonna do? Here's my hand right here, buddy. What in the
Pika.
world are you doing? Alright, point taken. Hey guys, gals, and all those outside and in between, I'm SharpZ, and today we're entering the final part of our RPG retrospective. In our previous two episodes, we've gone all the way from Dungeons and Dragons to its early computer ports, to the NES, to the SNES, the Genesis, and in the last video we covered the 3D era and the introduction of CDs with consoles like the N64, Sega Saturn, and, well, the GameCube and PlayStation 2. However, this is our last episode, and today we're going to cover the HD consoles as well as the Wii, DS, 3DS, and a few other odds and ends along the way. A few things I might have missed, and a few things that, well, I think just kind of need to be here. Anyway, with all that being said, let's get right into it. With the dawn of the HD era, the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 were both fighting over second place. There was one console that was definitively the winner sales-wise that generation. However, opinions on it have been mixed. I'm of course talking about the Nintendo Wii. Am I supposed to put the safety strap on when this thing is so big? Nintendo Wii is an interesting system to talk about. On one hand, you have a lot of great games on this console, and, well, on the other hand, it kind of has a mixed legacy. See, the Wii heavily relied on motion controls, which, while pretty revolutionary in some ways, also kind of hampered the console in others. If you look at this thing right here, Wii Remote, you don't really have a lot of buttons here, and this kind of limited a lot of games that could come to the system. Of course, that doesn't mean that you didn't have any RPGs. Of course, Xenoblade started on this thing, and you also had games like Fragile Dreams, Pandora's Tower, Last Story, and Ark-Rise Fantasia, as well as sequels to things like Tales of Symphonia, which also released on this system. There's still just not really a lot to talk about here. Unlike previous Nintendo consoles like the N64, which infamously lacked RPGs, or the GameCube, which had a decent library, or the SNES, which has a legendary library, or the NES, which it's the NES, what really is there to say about the Wii? This is Muramasa the Demon Blade, and this game is, well, it's phenomenal. The gameplay is this tight action game where you're constantly swapping swords to avoid durability loss, and when I say that, I know people are instantly getting flashes of Breath of the Wild, but unlike in that game, after your sword is broken, it kind of regenerates after a little bit of time. So think more so the Master Sword than anything else, and when I say Master Sword, I mean it only takes a couple seconds. Beyond that, this game is just really, really beautiful. I mean, look at it. The backgrounds have this nice hand-painted look to them, which, wow. The character designs are also great, and this game takes heavy cues from Japanese culture and folklore, which, while not necessarily 100% unique, there are quite a few games that take cues from this, gives this game a very unique feel in the wider zeitgeist of RPGs. If I were to compare this to anything, I would say that it feels like taking a game like Devil May Cry, giving it a 2D action system rather than the well-known 3D, mainly because you have launchers, a whole lot of combos that you can do out of the air, and mixing it with something like, say, Super Metroid when it comes to the world design. The world very much feels like a Metroidvania. Now, the reason I say this is a heavy RPG game is because you have skill trees and a whole lot of options in how you build your character, as well as a leveling system. Granted, I know some people are going to ask, so you talked about this, but you didn't talk about games like Castlevania Symphony of the Night or anything like that. Well, this game very heavily relies on that RPG system. I spent a lot of time during my playthrough of this just going into the menus and building my character, which feels more indicative of something like an RPG than, say, Castlevania. Look, I love Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and I would love to talk about it at some point, but this game just feels more like an RPG. My only issue with this game is something that isn't even in the game itself, but rather it's just overall accessibility. See, when I say this game released on the Wii, I mean it pretty much only released on the Wii. Sure, there is a version on the PlayStation Vita, which is very solid, but this game would be an easy port. Unlike a lot of the other games that I briefly talked about, it doesn't use any motion control whatsoever. This game is purely button-based, being able to be played on a Wii Remote, a Nunchuck and Wii Remote, or, well, Pro Controller or GameCube if you want to actually play with a standard controller. I'm saying this as someone who is a big fan of this game. Just play it. It's great. And, well, I think it's probably indicative of why a game like this could work on the Wii. It's just very solid, and the two campaigns offer a lot of playable content here. Muramasa the Demon Blade is not a perfect game by any means, but when it comes to RPGs on the Wii, you could do a whole lot worse.
はて、見覚えのない寂しいところ。
Yeah, I have a lot I could say about this game, and honestly, it's well worth a video in its own right at some point. But moreover, that's just kind of indicative of the Wii. A lot of the games that were best on this console when it came to RPGs either worked around the limitations or were good in spite of the limitations. And that's really indicative of the Wii as a whole. It's one of those systems where if something uses the gimmick really well, you almost don't notice it.
ピカ
No, we're not talking about Rumble and Battle Revolution.
ビー
Because they're not good. Fine, we'll talk about one Pokemon game later. Will that keep you quiet?
ピカ
Alright. But what about the two other consoles? Obviously, the Wii was not the best for RPGs, but when it came to the two competitor consoles, the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, we actually had quite a variety, and just a note here, I'm going to kind of merge these two together. Not to say there aren't a lot of great exclusives, for example, games like Demon's Souls, Fable 1 and 2, Drakengard, Lost Odyssey, and the Trail series were all exclusive upon release, and, well, that did some pretty good stuff for those series, and all those are great games, but there's kind of two that I needed to talk about, and both of them happen to release on both consoles. Before we get into those, though, I do want to talk about one game that I actually forgot that was, well, kind of important to this section. Let's talk about Deus Ex really quickly. Alright, consider this my apology for missing this game last episode. I really should have covered this one because Deus Ex is one of the most influential games, not just within the RPG genre, but of all time. But the main reason I skipped over it was because, well, I was covering consoles, and I really shouldn't have because this is one of the most influential games of all time. Mainly because it's credited with the creation of the immersive sim, and multiple developers will cite this as one of their biggest inspirations when it comes to why they develop games. And after taking the time to play through it, I can absolutely see why. Deus Ex is one of those games where it just does so much, that it's hard to approach and talk about it in such a short time span, but I guess I can try. See, why I love Deus Ex as a concept is because, well, it essentially lets the player do whatever in the world they want. It feels almost like a modern day sandbox game. There's no one way to approach everything. Similar to, well, I guess for a modern RPG example, a game like Undertale, where it lets you decide to spare or kill, the Deus Ex series is all about deciding how you approach things. For example, do you want to take a more combative approach? Do you want to be more stealthy? Do you want to talk your way out of conflict? This game will let you make those options. And, well, despite looking like a first-person shooter, this game does not play like one. I can tell you that much. Because I am terrible at first-person shooters, but even I found myself enjoying this game after a good while. Deus Ex is just a very, very solid game all around, and despite its age, I heavily recommend it. The reason I'm talking about a PC RPG is because, well, our next developer is mostly known for their work on PC. However, over time, they began to release on consoles as well, and that is Bethesda. See, the early Elder Scrolls games released almost exclusively on PC, and the first release on console, to my knowledge, was a release on the original Xbox. However, with this generation, Bethesda began to release most of their games across both consoles. And, well, this led to a variety of fairly highly regarded games. For example, you have games like Skyrim, which they won't stop releasing, Fallout 3 and 4, and the game that I consider to be their magnum opus, Fallout 76. I'm just kidding, I have more dignity than that. We're going to be talking about the one Fallout that I think everyone expected me to. Hey there, partner. Welcome to the world of Fallout New Vegas. Now I know what you're thinking. What in the world separates this Fallout from what came before? Well, you see, Fallout 3 might have been Fallout 3. A game which we're not gonna touch because it's not the one we're talking about today. We're talking about New Vegas. See, New Vegas takes a lot of what the first two games did and builds upon it in interesting and unique ways. It also has a very engaging story wherein three factions are fighting for supremacy over the New Vegas Strip. Each of these factions have their own culture, their own benefits and detriments, you could say. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into that because I'm no politician, but all I can say is that if you like games that leave a lot up to you, that let you make your own choices and deal with the consequences, this is the kind of game you'll like. Also, this game doesn't hold your hand at all, unlike those darned communists that those robots keep going on about. This game really likes to kick you right in the tuchus, partner, if you understand what my vernacular is saying. You see, this game doesn't really take any prisoners. It's the apocalypse, you idiot. When it's the apocalypse, you know what's gonna happen? You're gonna walk into a horde of giant mosquitoes that are bigger than anything that your eyes have ever laid upon, and you're gonna be ripped to shreds. And you know what we call that? We call that Wednesday, partner. Anyway, Fallout New Vegas is a realization of a lot of what the Fallout world can be. It feels unique and, as mentioned before, it really builds upon the firm foundation established by the previous two Fallout games.
Sorry you got twisted up in this scene. From where you're kneeling must seem like an 18-carat run of bad luck. Truth is, the game was rigged from the start.
With Bethesda out of the way, I will admit they're not exactly my favorite company. It's just what I usually like in RPGs is something that I've seen occasionally in Bethesda's work, but it's never really grabbed me the same way it has other people. Man, I hope there aren't any other series like that that I need to cover for this retrospective.
Wait, why do I hear boss music?
Fine, I'll talk about Souls games. Now, full disclosure, I'm not the biggest Souls-like enjoyer. I know that's kind of blasphemy to say on the internet, but eh. I appreciate these games for what they are, even if what they are is not necessarily for me. See, what I usually love about RPGs is character interaction. I love party systems, interplay between character arcs, and dialogue, and just a lot of stuff that Dark Souls kind of leans away from. And, well, here's the thing, that same kind of thing I will acknowledge is here. And weirdly enough, the best way to summarize it is the old adage about the Souls games, get good. And I think weirdly enough, that hits at the core of it. Souls games are often about internal growth, facing bosses and enemies which seem insurmountable but slowly become more understandable. It's a series where the growth comes from dying over and over again, but slowly finding the way forward, usually through learning more about the world rather than growing a stat or leveling up. Your biggest obstacle is ignorance. This fits the macabre and gothic worlds of most of the Souls games, especially something like Bloodborne. Beyond that, I appreciate the narratives given through the worlds and other non-traditional methods, things like notes, items descriptions, and even boss design, all lend the Souls games a unique and sometimes eldritch feel to me, since the lore itself feels more like a puzzle to fit together rather than an understandable series of events. I don't have anything against these games. I think sometimes it's important to acknowledge that affection is not always necessary for appreciation. The Souls games might not be my forte, but they have inspired the mechanics in games I love, like Shovel Knight's respawn mechanics and Hollow Knight's respawn mechanics, and have also given rise to games within the genre that I have enjoyed on their own. So ultimately, whether I love them or not, I can appreciate what they are, and I understand why so many people love these games. They have this internal challenge, this aspect of growth to them that's missing from a lot of other titles, and if you like that, the Souls games are an easy recommendation from me. While both Sony and Microsoft systems were lagging behind Nintendo's Wii, there actually was another system out around that time that was outselling all of them. And that would be the successor to the Game Boy, the Nintendo DS. This generation, Nintendo really went all in on the gimmicks. The Wii had motion controls, and the DS had dual screens. One of which was a touchscreen, which, during a time where smartphones weren't as readily available, was pretty neat. Of course, the DS is, well, kind of perfect for RPGs? Allow me to explain. Look at the following diagram. Yeah, for those of you who are just listening in rather than looking, essentially, the UI of something can easily be split across two screens, freeing up real estate on one so you can see more of the battle, or using one screen to manage inventory, taking a lot of the clunkiness out of some old turn-based games. And this can easily be seen in a lot of re-releases. For example, Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy both received re-releases on this system, which are regarded by many as some of the best ways to play those games. And, well, outside of the re-releases and all that, we did receive a few new entries in series. For example, there are DS entries in a lot of Nintendo's prominent franchises. You got, like, what? You had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. While Pokemon's all well and good, I think it's about time we talk about another Mario and Luigi's Bowser's Inside Story. I didn't forget about the Mario and Luigi series, I just was gonna cover it here. You shut your mouth. Okay, sorry, I'll just cover the game. So, you know how I mentioned with the Nintendo DS how you could split stuff between the top and the bottom screen for UI and all that? Well, this game not only does that, but it splits aspects of the gameplay between the top and the bottom screen in unique ways. For example, you might be playing as Bowser on the top and Mario and Luigi on the bottom, or, well, essentially mini games that are used for various attacks. The Mario and Luigi series is just this very colorful, very fun series of Mario RPGs, which is considered to be kind of the successor in the series, which started all the way back on the SNES with Super Mario RPG, which is weirdly enough receiving a remake now. Anyway, I digress. What exactly makes this game stand out to me among the rest of the DS's RPG library? Well, outside of the just hilarious premise, because look, this is a Mario game and you can make serious stuff with Mario, but look at the boy. Just look at Mario. Look at this lad. He is objectively hilarious to me. And, well, looking at Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story, it's no different. The premise is ridiculous, but the game does a whole lot with it mechanically. If you're looking for a solid RPG on this console, and one that's actually fairly available due to the fact that not only did it receive a re-release on 3DS, but also sold really well, so it's not that hard to find, it would be hard to find anything better than Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story. Yeah, there was honestly a lot of good stuff on the DS, including entries in Golden Sun and Glory of Hercules. You have a solid lineup there alone, and also some brand new IPs started around this time, i.e., Fossil Fighters and Nostalgia. Both of these are very solid games, which should be more readily available. But if you've caught on to a trend, it's that the DS had a lot of RPGs that were re-releases, and this is actually the same reason we're not going in depth on the PSP. Not to say that neither of these consoles had great libraries for this kind of thing. The PSP has an amazing RPG library, however, some of the most notable releases are the definitive versions of Persona 1, 2, and 3. What else do you want me to say? There's just not too much I could really talk about. It does have some great games on there, though. Just a lot of stuff that's either entries in series we've already covered, or Princess Crown releasing again for some reason. Or Xenosaga 1 and 2 on DS on one cartridge only in Japan. I'm not going to be rude, but why? See, Nintendo the Next Generation made some interesting business decisions. One of those we'll get to later, but first, let's talk about the giant 3DS in the room. Nintendo's handheld this generation received quite a few solid titles. And, well, I actually was really looking forward to talking about this handheld. Oddly enough, despite the fact that early on the 3DS didn't do too well, mainly because it was competing against smartphones, which the DS didn't really have to deal with until kind of the tail end of its life when cell phones were more widely adopted. The 3DS took a while to find its footing, but when it did, it received some absolutely stellar RPGs. Bravely Default is a good example. This is an RPG which kind of harkens back to Square Enix's older titles, and look, I just really like this one, so I wanted the opportunity to mention. It's also great, unique use of narrative structure, and the visual style, mwah, spot on. Of course, you have the usual suspects.
Pick up.
Oh, come on, you released X, Y, Sun, Moon, Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon. Oh yeah, but I'm the crazy one for saying that maybe we shouldn't have 6 games. Oh yeah, and Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. To avoid the existential crisis that Pokemon will put me into, let's talk about some other franchises. For example, Fire Emblem had a pretty great release on this system, in the form of Fire Emblem Awakening, a game which is credited with saving the franchise since the sales were kind of slumping and Nintendo was like, look, you either make this work, or we're going to send you to the exact same place where we sent F-Zero. But much to the behest of Smash fans, this game was actually very solid and saved the franchise from cancellation. So much to the point that the next Smash game, I have this leak, will be composed of entirely the characters who you do not want, because you refuse to learn the actual franchises of the anime sword fighters. I'm not bitter, I just want to make a point. Anyway, speaking of weird anime stuff, Persona Q and Persona Q2 also released on this system. These are little crossover titles between Persona 3, 4, and 5, and very fun games for Persona fans. They take a couple elements from the older games, like the first-person dungeons, and also let the characters from the two different worlds interact, and it's amazing. I really like it. Anyway, beyond that, there is also the Shin Megami Tensei franchise, which got a release on DS. And, well, needless to say, Atlas fans, you got a lot on the DS and 3DS. Like, there's just a lot that you can talk about with Atlas here. But I digress. Xenoblade Chronicles also received a port for some reason, continuing the trend of the Xeno series getting the weirdest ports known to man. I don't know why they thought it would be a good idea to port this thing to something that had, like, almost the power of the GameCube when it already pushed the Wii's hardware. But they did it, and actually I've heard this port's pretty decent. I haven't played it myself, so I wouldn't know, but hey. However, I ended up saying to myself, I need to pick at least one 3DS game that I think really stands out from the crowd. When it comes to Ever Oasis, I feel like this game shows what you can do if you, well, essentially really focus on one RPG village very heavily. What I mean by that is this game centers around you as the player creating your own oasis in the middle of a massive desert. And, well, I really love this game, okay? From this art style, which is insanely colorful, to just the general feel of the villagers with the amount of variety in character designs. I know this one for me is a completely biased pick. You know, I'm not even going to be subtle about that. But I would argue out of pretty much any other game I've talked about today, this is one of those that just means a lot to me for some reason. There's just something about this game that whenever I sit back and play it, it's like a nice warm cup of tea. I just always can find something to enjoy about it. As for the game itself, outside of what I've already said, the gameplay is actually fairly unique as well, heavily relying on the character's wind powers, and, well, it feels almost like a mix between Zelda dungeon-style puzzles and an action RPG. Also, the battle system is very unique in this one as well. I don't really want to say too much on it because, look, Ever Oasis is one of those games where I feel like you just need to sit down and play through this one. It's an amazing experience, and Nintendo, please port this to something in the future. I keep getting more anxious by the day about the 3DS and DS games that are just kind of sitting without any ports, and this is definitely among that list. So, please, go play it. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. You know how I said Ever Oasis is just this insanely charming game with great characters, a colorful setting, etc.? Well, what if we took the more ridiculous side of RPGs? See, while I mentioned that tabletop gaming has this aspect of camaraderie to it, where you're playing with a bunch of friends through a campaign, it kind of lends itself to stupid moments as well. I'm not joking when I've said that I've had moments including the bard trying to seduce this door, the bard trying to for some reason, push a boulder down a hill into a dragon's den, even though the DM repeatedly said this will probably kill the entire village. Or the time where our ranger just kept getting curses where he had to speak entirely in a British accent. Look, considering this is me, I had to throw in at least one or two very weird games into here to kind of fill my personal quota. And, well, when it came down to weird games from this generation, it's Miitopia. The footage you're seeing here is from the Switch version, mainly because that version just looks a whole lot better and is easier to record. But really, there's not too much of a difference outside of the Switch version adding a horse, of all things, and also making the Mii Maker the best it's ever been, and then refusing to use the Miis in anything afterward. I'm just getting older and still having to account for that. Anyway, the main thing with Miitopia that I love is how stupid this game is. And I use stupid as a term of endearment. There are moments in this game where your party will do stuff you don't want them to do, and by moments, I mean almost every single battle. Look, Miitopia is just ridiculously fun, and a game that's not made to be taken seriously. Beyond that, this is probably the best reflection of the stupidity that can be present within D&D that I mentioned earlier. While yes, there is a lot of fun seriousness to be had with RPGs, it's just as important sometimes to remember how weird the concept of a whole bunch of people sitting at a table throwing a whole bunch of dice of weird shapes to get specific numbers, all to beat a dragon that does not exist, is. Like, man, RPGs are weird once you abstract them. And this game just says, yeah, it's weird. Now go fight whoever in the world is the Dark Lord. I don't know, Homer Simpson. You make it up. But, you know, I'm not bitter. I'm not mad that the Miis are probably not going to be as big anymore. It's fine. I know that. You don't need to tell me. Anyway. Enough about the weird sadness. Also, the Vita. I'm just gonna toss a few games that were on the Vita into here. Persona 4 Golden. That's really the only one I know. I had to do research over, like, hundreds of games. You really think I would take the time to look in depth on Vita? Anyway, let's move on to our next console. The most successful part of this generation. What do you mean it wasn't the Ouya? I bought, like, I invested so much stock in that company. The Ouya can't be that. No, no, I refuse to believe it. How am I supposed to get my games at a bargain price now? What other console can I fit into a stupid paper bag? Okay, fine, I'll talk about the Wii U instead. Anyway, the Wii U is an interesting case here because, well, this is another gimmick system. And I say jokingly, but kind of half jokingly, call this thing the TVDS. Because what else am I supposed to call the Wii U? Like, two screens, one touchscreen, even has a lot of the same stuff like a microphone and a camera. Come on, it's a TVDS. Which kind of makes sense because, well, my point about the Wii U being kind of a TVDS means that my point about the DS being perfect for RPGs still stands. But there were some interesting choices made here. Like Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE. This game later released on the Switch, but I kind of need to talk about it, right? But I also want to talk about Color Splash. Okay, Nintendo, I am not mad. I am just asking questions. Who asked for this? And, well... Okay, fine. Let me just go ahead and put it like this. So, Shin Megami Tensei, a series known for deep plots with angels and demons, potential world takeovers, and dark beings beyond the comprehension of mankind. And then you have Fire Emblem, a series which, while it does have its more fan servicey elements, is also known for having deep political intrigue, commentary on the effects of war, and how even one death can have a massive impact due to the permadeath system that's been prevalent within the game since the beginning. And you decided to make... what? What is this? Don't take all my bashing on the game as me saying the game is bad. It's actually a very solid title. But it's just weird that for a crossover between these two franchises, they went in this direction. Like, who looked at Fire Emblem and Shin Megami Tensei and said, you know what this needs? Hatsune Miku. Why do I have this? The Wii U also has one more game I want to talk about, oddly enough, and that would be Xenoblade Chronicles X. Now, I know I said that I'm not really going to talk about Xenoblade, mainly because I have a 3 to 4 video essay series planned on it. So do you think I love Xenoblade? I digress. But Xenoblade X isn't really a part of that because, well, that covers mainly the Xenoblade trilogy. However, that's not to say that Xenoblade X isn't a phenomenal title. I really, really do love X, and I feel like this is the perfect opportunity to talk about it. So, Xenoblade Chronicles X. Man, this is a game that Look, when it comes to the wider Xeno series, X is not as connected as the other three are. I don't really want to get into why, because that's... Look, just play the games. But if you want to play them, X is one of the good starting points for the series. The combat, especially the gunplay, is something I've heard a ton of compliments about. There is a battle system which involves giant robots. Look, I have a thing for giant robots. If you throw giant robots into anything, I will like it. But beyond that, it's a Xeno game. It's well written, the characters are relatable, there's usually a good amount of imagery, the world design is phenomenal, I love walking around this place, and just the moment you first enter the more open areas and can look around you, you begin to get that feeling of, wow, there is a lot to this world. And as someone who's played every single Xeno game, yeah, X it's phenomenal. So, you know, play it. And it's a great entry point too, so, you know, I will make a video eventually on how to get into the series, but if you think that this series has inspired you to get into RPGs, if it's accessible, pick it up. And hopefully this one does get a Switch port. Oddly enough, this is one of the few games that has remained Wii U exclusive, and not for lack of demand. If I ask Xeno fans what ports they want, if it's not a Xenosaga or a Xenogears port, it's Xenoblade Chronicles X. And X would honestly work perfectly on the Switch. Add in an online component, maybe some form of local co-op, and, well, it would be perfect for handheld play or even local wireless play. Look, there's just a ton that you can do with this game if it's on newer hardware, and I would love to see Nintendo do that. Every time I say I would love to see Nintendo do that, they never do it, so... You know what? I'm just gonna shut up. I'm sorry, Xenoblade fans. Sure, calm down. Calm down. The multinational company is not going to hurt you. Yet. Oh, you hear that too? Wait, that alarm. That can only mean one thing. Is everyone ready to talk about the indie games? Alrighty, we already got the music playing, let's start with Undertale. We can put this one in the thumbnail now because I know people will click when they see the funny skeleton. So, Undertale is unique in that it takes cues from some older RPGs, in particular note Earthbound, and, well, instead of using its battle system just as a tool for battles, it uses it as a storytelling, well, tool? I don't really know how to put it. The battle system in Undertale doesn't really feel as well defined as it is in other games, and I don't mean that in like a negative way, but more so in a, this game really likes to experiment with its battle system. The main gimmick of Undertale is that every enemy can be killed or spared, and based on who you decide to kill or spare, the ending will vary greatly, and there are consequences to your actions. This is part of why I think Undertale has gathered such a devoted fan base over the years. These characters are, well, here because you had to work to keep them here. Sparing characters is often harder than just doing the traditional RPG route. But that's enough about Undertale, and, you know, I know people are going to say, but what about Deltarune? Pretty much everything I say about Undertale applies to Deltarune, it's just slightly different, and that game's not fully finished yet, so not really gonna talk about it right now. Besides, Undertale gets a lot of attention, and I think we should give a spotlight to a few more indie RPGs. Before we move on to a few more I want to cover in depth, some of the ones that I want to mention are... First, there is Bug Fables, a game that's inspired by the old Paper Mario games. Then you have two games which I decided not to talk about either because the content is a little or I just don't really think I would have enough to say on them to make a segment. And that would be the heartbreaking story that is Omori, the uncomfortable series that is the Lisa series, the colorful Inkenfell, and the procedurally generated Wildermyth. Each of these are great and well worth your time, and I'm going to avoid saying more. So, let's move on to the two that I really want to talk about. First is Crosscode. This game is insanely solid. It takes a lot of inspiration from old SNES RPGs and mixes it with something like Phantasy Star, taking cues from MMOs. I just really like this one. And it's fast, kinetic, and feels like an evolution of the old school RPG. I mean, while you have games like Octopath or Triangle Strategy, which kind of take an HD lens and put it on an old-style game, this feels like an evolution of that formula. And it's not turn-based, but I'm gonna be honest, I just really like it and wanted an excuse to include it. Alright, now let's move on to the other one.
What's next?
Just one more test. Let's start. This time the combat simulation should be fine. I'm using the latest data for your targets.
They seem different. Alright, ready when you are.
You ever just look at a game and say, oh yeah, that's something I'd like? See, that's me in this game. I really love the art style here, a mix of vectors, sprites, 3D models that are low poly, and it uses that to full effect. Things like sweeping camera shots that can only be done in 3D, as well as, well, just look at the smoothness of the animation here. It's insane sometimes. Beyond that, there's the combat, which, as you've seen, is quick, kinetic, fast, fun, and the environments are insanely aesthetically pleasing. Like almost everywhere you walk into, the music is an absolute bop, which you've been hearing in the background right now too, so I don't think I need to explain that to you. Now, why do I like this game so much? I think on one hand, aside from the fact that the story is okay, not anything to write home about, this game is just, well, it's what it sets out to be. Anno Mutatianum is designed to be a tight action RPG with very, very appealing combat and visual style, and it succeeds in that. Also, the voice acting is pretty good in my opinion. There's very few characters who I heard them speak and said, well, that's an odd choice. And the world is interesting despite the fact I said the story isn't. It's just more so the beat-to-beat plot didn't grab me the same. I was more so playing to get to the action scenes than playing to finish. And, well, if you want a very tight action game that's available on Switch, PS4, and PC, you could do a whole lot worse than Anno Mutatiano.
Gentlemen, this way.
I think that's enough said about the indies. But as usual, a lot of unique and really, really inspiring stuff comes from the indie scene. Let's get into the Xbox One and the PS4. With these two consoles, there's a lot of overlap. For example, most games that released on one will have released on the other. And that includes stuff like the South Park RPGs, which technically started the previous generation, but if I can get an excuse to say the title, The Fractured But Whole, in a video, I'm gonna take that over the stick of truth because I have the worst sense of humor. But we also have games that kind of came out and were fairly impactful on their series. For example, Final Fantasy VII received a remake, which was a long time coming. I don't know why 7 has so many games outside of the main one. I mean, I kind of do, it's the most popular one, but I digress. We also got Kingdom Hearts 3, which was the first numbered Kingdom Hearts in a while. Look, there's been consistent Kingdom Hearts games. You have like Birth by Sleep, Dream Drop Distance, and 2.8 over 6 days DDR remix featuring Winnie the Pooh and Knuckles. Insane trilogy. Wait, I think that might just be my prescription. Never mind. We also have, well, Persona 5. While I'm not going to go in depth on this one, I will say that it has introduced a lot of people to not just the Persona series, but also the SMT series, and yes, that UI is very stylish. It always has been in the Persona series, but 5 is... it looks great. Also, there's The Witcher 3, made by CD Projekt Red. This is a game that I don't necessarily have a lot of opinions on, because I haven't played it, but I know a lot of people love it. And for many, this was their introduction to CD Projekt Red, the company that would later go on to make the sequel to Fallout 76, Cyberpunk 2077. While all those games are really great, I felt like I needed to narrow it down to only a couple to talk about. And, well, we already talked about Dark Souls, so let's talk about a series that I've kind of been avoiding. Explicitly because there's a lot of really weird content in the series, to put it nicely. But hey, now that the end is fairly close, I think we should finally start to talk about Drakengard. After all, the end is... I wasn't gonna make that stupid joke. Let's talk about Nier Automata. Nier Automata is a game that completely blindsided me. A game that did everything I did not expect it to do, while also doing everything I expected it to. Let me explain. This game was made in collaboration of two parties. Square Enix, the rights holders for Drakengard as well as Nier, since it's a spin-off of that series, and Platinum Games. For those of you who are not familiar with the work of Platinum, some of their more notable titles include Bayonetta, Vanquish, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, and Astral Chain. And, well, you can see it here. This game is insanely tight and fluid, as is well known with Platinum. If you put them in a game, they will make an action game that rivals even Devil May Cry. They are immensely skilled at what they do. But here's the thing, usually I know Platinum as the over-the-top, goofy, action set-piece developers, but there's something about even Nier's crazy moments that feel subdued. Like here. Now, I know to most of you that reveal of a cityscape seemed completely irrelevant, but let me say one thing. It was assigned to me that this game was going to be something unique. Walking through the ruins of this city made me feel, well, more in awe than I ever have in a game. There's something about skyscrapers empty, rotting, and completely unused, while grass and shrubbery overtakes what once was a bustling metropolis that just feels odd. It's weird that the very ground beneath our feet feels as alien as any other planet. The color scheme of this game helps with that too. The Nier series often has very interesting color palettes. Despite the fact this game has a fairly realistic art style in some ways, that color palette really helps it stand out at times. But honestly, what I love the most about Nier is how everything comes together. There's no part of this game that feels like it was made in a vacuum. Everything from the fact that, well, Nier Automata has a menu system that incorporates into the story. If you played the game, you'll know why I'm saying that. To the fact that this game even uses the fact that it is a game to push forward the narrative. If you look at Nier, to me it shows what can be done if you look at video games as a medium for storytelling, and take that to its logical conclusion. Nothing is set in stone. Everything can be used in specific ways. And, well, that's kind of the beauty of it for me. Nier Automata is not like any other Platinum game I've played, while simultaneously being insanely similar to a lot of them. It's not like the other RPGs on this list in that it's, well, it's impacted me in ways I don't quite know how to explain. There's something about how this game interacts with the player that just sticks with you. And I think that's the highest praise I can give this game. Beyond Nier Automata, there were actually a few more RPGs I wanted to talk about. One of those was Code Vein, another Souls-like game. This one had an anime inspiration. I wonder why I like it. Hey Sharp, come drink this rat poison! Yeah, sure, I'll take rat poison if it says anime on it. Let's talk about the Nintendo Switch. This console has a lot of great games on it. Not only does it have the Xenoblade trilogy, which, if you know me, is the only thing I need to subsist on, it's actually on my hierarchy of needs right under... Actually, is it under or above Oxygen? I constantly forget. Did I remember to breathe this morning? But since we're here, you know what? Let's go a little more in depth on two of Nintendo's big franchises that I haven't really talked about too much. Fine, we'll get you out of the way first. When it comes to the Switch Pokemon releases, well, when it comes to the Nintendo Pokemon releases on the Switch, things have been mixed reception-wise, to say the least. Whether it be Pokemon Let's Go not having the warmest reception, or Sword and Shield's graphics conversation, or Scarlet and Violet's performance issues, or there was probably something about Legends Arceus, are the entirety of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. I don't know if that's the actual titles, but I'm too lazy to actually go and Google it. That shows you how much I really care about those games. I had to pick one. And, well, actually for me it was fairly easy. Because I wanted to talk about something that really shifted the Pokemon formula. Something that I can talk about to show how much RPGs have changed since, well, our previous episodes. So of course I picked Pokemon Legends Arceus. On one hand, Legends Arceus takes a lot from the original Pokemon formula. You still have pretty much the exact same battle system. Granted, over the years, types have been added. They're not exactly on the Game Boy anymore, and dear lord, graphically, yeah, it's not the best thing I've ever seen, but I do really love the skyboxes and a few parts of the environment. Sure, every once in a while it doesn't look exactly picture perfect, but I like how it looks most of the time. But that's enough about the graphics. Gameplay-wise, I feel like there is a high probability that this is the best playing Pokemon game. While I love Pokemon's battle system, the one thing that I really find myself doing after a while in the games is just trying to get my Pokemon strong enough to beat bosses without really caring about battling Pokemon out in the wild. However, since you can catch Pokemon without having to fight them, that makes it so much more fun to just run around and throw Pokeballs at everything. And I am so disappointed that that did not come back in Scarlet and Violet. Like, honestly, being able to just catch wild roaming Pokemon is so cool to me, and this is the first time in one of the Pokemon games where I walked around and said, yeah, this feels like a living, breathing Pokemon world. There's Pokemon everywhere, they have different reactions to you. Granted, I'm going to go ahead and say a few things. If there's one change I would make to this formula, I would love to see these games add in some kind of ecosystems or Pokemon that just interact with each other. But aside from that, it's a great step forward for the series, and one I hope that they continue to run with. Yeah, Legends Arceus is just a lot of what I wanted out of a Pokemon game. And before someone asks, the Let's Design a Pokemon Game video is still being worked on, mainly because there's so much content that I had planned for that I felt it might be better as a podcast or something. I don't know. But let's get back to the Nintendo Switch here. Outside of Nintendo's offerings, before we get to our final game by Nintendo we're going to talk about, there are actually a few more noteworthy games to talk about. For example, Danganronpa had a weird spin-off thing. Okay, I'm joking. That's not the one that I'm going to talk about. I think I'm going to talk about a cash grab. This video wasn't sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. The final few games that we're going to just briefly go through. Octopath Traveler and Project Triangle Strategy. They really did just go with the... No, look at me. This isn't a bit. They actually just went with that title. Yep. Okay, Octopath Traveler and Project Triangle Strategy. Both of which are very, very solid games with a very retro aesthetic. Also, Bravely Default got a sequel, of course. Miitopia received a remake, which is actually the version you saw earlier, so surprise, surprise. And, well, Fire Emblem has received 2 entries. And 2 Warriors games. Even Persona 5 got one. And Xenoblade fans keep asking when we're going to get a Warriors game, which I don't know how to feel about. Moving on, let's talk about one of those Fire Emblem games. In particular, the one that I kind of have a mixed relationship with, because it forced me to relive my days in school. Look, this might shock some of you. Not the biggest Fire Emblem fan. I think that the series is good for what it is, but what it is not necessarily for me, per se. With that being said, though, Fire Emblem is an incredibly solid series. And Three Houses was one of those entries where I said, you know, this might not be my thing, but I still really love this one. The main thing for me is the amount of options that you get with your units, and, well, just in general, you have 3 campaigns here. That is 3 story modes to play through. And, well, all of them feel different. Despite following very similar plot points, there's, like, a different angle with each group that you can go with, and I just really like this one, okay? Like, I don't want to go too much more in depth. Look at the video, we're at an hour already. I've hit my quota. But with that being said, this is the last game that we're going to be talking about. Alright, we'll just start that part here. So, somebody decided it was lap time, which means it's time to give the recommendations. So, for starters, we have Ever Oasis. When it comes to the 3DS, Ever Oasis and Bravely Default are probably my 2 easiest recommendations, just because both of those are very solid and don't really require you to like play through all the Persona series or be a fan of Pokemon to get the full enjoyment out of them. When it comes to the DS, Mario and Luigi is an easy recommendation. I know it's a little gimmicky and a little childish at times, but I still like it. Also, pretty much any remake on there is solid, as well as the Pokemon games on there being some of the better entries in my opinion. Glory of Hercules is also a very solid one, and the Golden Sun entry on there is also solid, so you have a lot of options when it comes to that system. The PSP, I don't really have too much to say about, aside from the Persona remakes are all very solid, and you also got games like Disgaea, which had releases on there, which I think are fairly solid. I think Disgaea released on there? I'm gonna look like an idiot if I have to cut this out in post. What's that? What's that? She wants me to talk about the Xbox. Okay. So, even though I'm not the biggest fan of it, I do recommend that everyone at least tries Dark Souls. Don't have to go all the way through, but at least try it. We also have games like Skyrim, which are solid and a lot of people like, but Fallout New Vegas, that's my easy recommendation. Also play Deus Ex, like it's really solid. I know I might have made it look terrible by putting it with a whole bunch of HD games, but it's very solid, and I got my copy on sale on Steam for like $2, so it's fairly readily available too. We also have Fable 2 and 3, in particular Fable 2. 3 is a little more but 2 is very solid. There is also the Wii U Xenoblade Chronicles X. Because if you're going to play Tokyo Mirage Sessions, there's no reason to go with the Wii U version over the Switch if you have an option between the two. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And speaking of the Switch, Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3. They're all very solid games. I would say just don't start on 2. Not because 2's on 2 or 3, not because either of them are bad or anything, but because 3 you won't get the most out of unless you played 1 or 2. And while you could technically start by that metric with either 1 or 2, 2 has a slightly more complex battle system for beginners. So, that's an issue. However, I will make a more in-depth video on how to get into Xenoblade at some point. But beyond that, we also have more entries in the Tales series. If you're a South Park fan, the South Park RPGs are very solid on pretty much everything. Outer Worlds. I kind of liked it. So, yeah. Obviously, any game I talked about in depth, like Nier Automata, as well as its prequel and its remake, so Nier Replicant. There's also Nier Gestalt, which was the original. Personally, I prefer Replicant to Gestalt, but that might just be me. There's just a ton to talk about within this generation. And that's what I find kind of crazy, is when I entered this generation, I'm like, oh, there's gonna be like a whole lot to talk about, right? But I ended up saying to myself, we have to narrow it down to a few. So, I didn't get to talk about everything I love, but I got to talk about a lot of what I love. So, I'm kind of satisfied there. Oh, also Code Vein and Sekiro. Both of those I am not the biggest into Souls games, but people told me if you want to get into those, Sekiro or Bloodborne are your two best entry points. Anyway, with all that being said, I think it's about time that we wrap up. So, until next time, guys, this is SharpZ signing off. What? What do you mean I can't end? I'm almost done. This whole journey that you put me through, I'm almost done with it. Again? Really? Again with that? Where did... a USB drive? I'm not the only one seeing this, right? Like... I'm afraid I can't let you do that, Sharp. Okay. Yeah, sure, Mr. Detective, like, I'm gonna listen to you. For someone who's a detective, you sure have forgotten that breaking and entering is a crime. That's pointless anyway. I've already seen my face plenty of times. Okay, well, I have the USB stick, so... what are you gonna do about it? Oh, what am I gonna do, huh? One thing you'll learn, kid. You always come prepared for these kind of things. Now you put that little thing down, and you step away. Oh, that's a light gun. Yeah, that's not gonna do anything. Just watch me.
Hello? Is this thing on? Finally.
Wait, what? Knew you would go ahead and do it.
Sharp? You do remember the contract, right?
I am about 75% sure I've never met you. I'm terrible with faces.
Oh, you don't even remember that now, do you? It's literally right behind me. ZZ.
Oh, ZZ, yeah, because that's a very professional name.
And your last name is canonically Xena Thaddeus.
Look, she printed out a resume for you. Zyla Xena Zanzaya. The heck is a Cyber Reaper?
Yeah, I read. So?
What does that even mean?
Oh, so that's your question now. We went over all this. When the population gets so high, how do you expect the Grim Reaper to do it all on his own? It's just one skeleton with a scythe. So of course we use the internet. Of course, it's not that complicated.
Okay, consider that resume denied. But, more importantly, when did I actually make a Faustian bargain? Because I don't remember that. I don't have it on my calendar.
Sharp, I don't want to hear it. I missed 8 months of work for this. 8 months. No. Do you have any idea how many of my sick days I have left? Like, -20.
You have seen my videos. You know I am an eccentric weirdo.
I don't know how to say this. You are the worst person I've ever worked with. You had one stipulation. 3 videos, 3 months. And what do? You don't. You don't. You just don't. And...
Okay, fair enough.
No. I don't want to hear anything from you. Now I'm gonna have to do, like, 50 things of paperwork. Because... you... made this stupid mistake.
Anyway, let's just end it here.
No.
Until
Sharp,
next
I know
time,
what you're about to do, and
this is
don't
SharpZ,
you dare do it.
signing
Sharp, you stupid
off.
son of a.
Well, I guess that's it. That's all this retrospective done, and it's been a journey. Needless to say, I have played through a lot of games over this last year in order to make this video, and it's satisfying to finally see it done. First off, I want to say if you've watched this far, you're probably already subscribed, but there is a button that YouTube has for that, so feel free to click that. But more importantly, I want to say thanks to everyone who's been engaging with me, be it here or on Twitter. I've just been blindsided by how much I've seen both of those growing over the last few months, and honestly, as someone who loves doing this, it's good to see that other people feel the same way and like this content. For anyone who's curious about what's happening at the end, well, let's just say I do have plans. But before we talk about the future, I do want to say one thing. If you're wondering why go through all this for one genre? Well, you see, the original Dungeons & Dragons came out in 1974. That means that next year it will be 50 years old. And since it's considered the inspiration of most modern RPGs, I felt it was only fitting to go all the way from there to where we are now. The future of RPGs looks bright, and I'm super excited. It's great to see something that I love go from a niche hobby to something that's widely accepted and widely beloved within just a few years. But I think I should cut things off now before I get too sappy. Anyways, I probably should continue talking with ZZ over a few things. So until next time, guys, this is SharpZ signing off.